Hey folks, Sarah here, and as usual, I've been keeping my eye out for new releases from small presses and university presses. And I think I have a really great group to share with you today, including a few books that might fit into your spring readathons and read-alongs that are happening here on Booktube. And if you stick to the end, I'll share a little bit about what I've been reading recently, as well as a very exciting for me bookish book-related purchase that I found from one of my local shops. Otherwise, let's get going. I have a group of books here that are being published or have been published between April 18th, so a few days ago from when this is being filmed, up until April 25th, which is a few days from now when this is being filmed. So let's dive in and share. First up is a novel called Any Other City by Hazel Jane Plant, and this is published by Arsenal Pulp Press, and you may recognize it because it's one of the readathon, read-along books for Trans Girl April, which is hosted by Books and Bow and Say Kevy. This is one of the books they've chosen for their readathon, and it was published on April 18th. And this is a book about it's set up as a fictional memoir, and it's being told by a trans indie rock musician who's achieved semi-fame, is how they describe it in the blurb. And the memoir is split between two time periods. So side A of the memoir it takes place like in 1993 or like sometime in the 90s, and then side B of the memoir takes place in 2019. And the blurb says that the memoir, or it's not actually a memoir, it's a novel. The novel reveals how the act of creation can heal trauma and even change the past. I also really encourage you to check out Arsenal Pulp Press's websites. They publish a lot of great trans literature, and they actually you can filter their books to show the books that they have published, and I'll leave the link below that takes you directly to their trans literature category. And one of the books on there is one of my favorite books that I read last year. It's My Volcano by John Elizabeth Stintsey, and I think it's like blurbed as it's called like eco horror or something. It's a wild and wacky book. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. So check out Arsenal Pulp Press. They're great. Also a potential read as we're wrapping up Trans Girl April, but also a book that you should and could read at any time of year. There's a poetry collection being published, or was published on April 18th, called Trans Reincarnation. And this is by a trans masculine poet named E. Kerr. And I always struggle to describe poetry that I haven't actually read, but these poems, according to the description, aim to rewrite the narrative of the body its speaker finds themselves trapped in, using poems that are experimental in form, but also poetry that is reimagined traditional received forms. Again, hard to describe not having read it, but it sounds really fantastic, and I love the title as well. And did I mention that is from Mason Jar Press. Moving right along with these booktube categories for your horror mayhem reading list, Tananarive Due has a collection of short stories coming out from Akashic Books, and the book is called The Wishing Pool and Other Stories. And this Due is an award-winning author and film historian, and these are 14 horror tales, frightful tales, and I believe they're broken into like 4 sections. And the first section is more classic horror tales, and then the second section are stories that all take place within the same geographical location. They're in a small town, a swampy Florida town, and then the last 2 sections I think are more like sci-fi horror. So a great reading possibility, especially since I believe from what I've seen for Horror Mayhem, the focus is on shorter forms of fiction, like short stories and novellas and stuff like that. So fits in just right. My son is ill today. It is lunchtime, and he is in the other room watching Minecraft tutorials. So you might hear a little noise. Again, I've been told to go film in another room because he's doing Minecrafty things while he's homesick. So then we have also on April 18th, Secret Harvest by David Mas Masumoto, and it's illustrated by Patricia Wakita. And this is nonfiction. The author is an organic farmer as well as a writer and activist. And he, in this book, is investigating the story of a long-lost aunt of his who had a mental disability and as a Japanese American was imprisoned in an internment camp during World War II. And then afterwards she became a ward of the state due to her disability. And the family assumed that she died, but 70 years later, the family found out that she was still alive and living only a few miles from the family farm. And so this is the author's story, family history and story of this, like investigating like what happened and what has happened to her all these past 7 decades that she's been gone. So it sounds absolutely fascinating and heartbreaking. And again, that's from Red Hen Press. And then from Alice James Books, we have a cover that I have been pining for ever since I saw it, like at the beginning of last fall, I think. Burning Like Her Own Planet by Vandana Khanna. And this is a poetry collection, again, from Alice James Books. I believe it's the poet's 3rd collection, if I'm reading that correctly. So this, at its heart of the collection, is a feminist reimagining of the lives of 2 Hindu goddesses, Sita and Parvati, through a contemporary lens, which sounds amazing. From IG Publishing, we have Minor Prophets by Blair Hurley, and this novel takes place both in the remote wilderness of Michigan's Upper Peninsula and then later in time in Chicago. So it's in my neck of the woods, and it's about a young girl named Nora who grew up within a militant apocalyptic religious cult and then later moves to Chicago and is kind of dealing with the traumatic aftermath of her childhood and then her subsequent escape from this cult. And again, that's from IG. I don't actually know if it's I assume it's IG Publishing, but that's how you pronounce it. I'll look that up. From Catapult, also on April 18th, we have Juno Loves Legs by Carl Geary. And it says, the summary, it says, it's for fans of Shuggie Bain and A Little Life. Juno Loves Legs is the epic and heartbreaking story of a young friendship between 2 teens, Juno and Legs. And it's set in working class Dublin in the 1980s. And it looks like it's getting like quite a bit of praise, so it sounds great. And Catapult has had a couple of really big books recently that have gotten a lot of good press. From Bywater Books, we have The Fitful Sleep of Immigrants by Orlando Ortega Medina. This is a thriller, and it's about attorney Mark Mendez, and in the description it says, a gay lawyer copes with relationship problems, family drama, addiction, and a seductive stalker in this twisty thriller. From Other Press, we have Planting Our World by Stefano Mancuso, translated by Gregory Conti. And this is a book about plants, which seems to be a theme here on my channel somehow. And from the description, I learned that we animals account for a paltry 0.3% of the planet's biomass, while plants add up to 85% of the planet's biomass. But we tend to see the world, obviously, from our human-animal perspective and tend to kind of overlook the massive amounts of plant life around us. So this collection of vignettes seeks to correct that viewpoint a bit by focusing on the interconnections between plants and humans. And each story tells the story of a very specific plant. So for example, the red spruce that gave Stradivarius his violins, and liberty trees that were planted in France during the French Revolution, and a 1967 hoax about psychedelic bananas, apparently. So it sounds really, really fun and interesting. And again, that's from Other Press. And then the last book from April to 18th that I have is another nonfiction book that sounds amazing, called Cleopatra's Daughter, From Roman Prisoner to African Queen. And this is from Norton. And this is the first modern biography of one of the most influential yet long neglected rulers of the ancient world, Cleopatra Selene, who was the daughter of Antony and Cleopatra. And Cleopatra Selene was young when her parents both died, famously. And instead of being then murdered like her brothers were, she was actually captured and brought to Rome and raised up as a Roman. And eventually they married her off to a Numidian prince, and eventually she became Queen of Mauritania and ruled successfully for 20 years. But her biography has never been told, and I did not know about her, so sounds amazing, right? So I might be picking up. I'm not a big reader of biographies, but that one sounds really good. Moving on to April 25th, we have Robin and Her Misfits by Kellyanne Jacobson, and this is from Three Rooms Press. And this is a young adult novel, I believe, and it is a reimagining of Robin Hood, the Robin Hood legend. But the Merry Men are a roving gang of fiercely unique queer female bikers, street racers, and thieves. And their leader, Robin, drives them from a life of greed to a pledge to steal from the rich and give back to queer girls in need of help. From New York Review Books, we have a nonfiction book called Affinities on Art and Fascination by Brian Dillon. Another one of those books that is kind of hard to describe, but in this book, it sounds like Dillon takes images and artwork that he is drawn to and decides that he has, a strong affinity for, and then explores like where that affinity came from, what's behind his reaction, what's behind his attraction to those particular artists and those particular works of art. So it's really exploring like what attracts us to a piece of art, what inspires us to say like, I love this artwork, I love this artist. What's behind that? It's an aesthetic thing, but it's also an emotional thing, reaction that's going on. And so the book is exploring that affinity. Another biography of a neglected hero of history. We have Into the Amazon, The Life of Candido Rondon, trailblazing explorer, scientist, statesman, and conservationist. So again, this is another historical figure who was not super well known. Candido Rondon was a Brazilian hero of indigenous, Portuguese, and Spanish descent. He was an explorer, a scientist, a statesman, and a conservationist, as the title says, who guided Theodore Roosevelt on Roosevelt's 1914 Amazon expedition. And Rondon was also a diplomat and indigenous rights activist, and was actually nominated by Albert Einstein for the Nobel Peace Prize, and deserves to be better known, hence this amazing sounding biography that is also being published by Norton. I was so excited I didn't even say the author. The author is Larry Roeder, and again, it's being published by Norton, who does great biographies. So 2 biographies from Norton this April. More than that this April, but 2 that made my list. Then from Yale University, we have another nonfiction, The Rediscovery of America, Native Peoples and the Unmaking of U.S. History. And this is described as a sweeping and overdue retelling of U.S. history, and it spans 5 centuries of history, and works and unworks and untangles that history to recognize how essential Native Americans are to understanding the evolution of the United States. And so the author shows how Native communities have always been a part of every historical event in this country, and by actually going to major historical events and studying communities and individuals' roles in those historical events. So for example, he looks at the American Revolution and the Civil War from the Native American perspective, and that's by Ned Blackhawk, and it's published by Yale University. Then from the New Press, another nonfiction book, When the Smoke Cleared, the 1968 Rebellions and the Unfinished Battle for Civil Rights in the Nation's Capital. And this is a very intensely researched history of the 1968 riots in Washington, D.C., following the murder of Martin Luther King Jr., and then studies the long-lasting effects of those riots on D.C. and then on the nation as a whole. another nonfiction book on my list. I'm heavy on the nonfiction this week, I guess, even though I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but when I look it up, it always sounds so fascinating, so I add it. This is from Beacon Press. It's called Momfluenced: Inside the Maddening, Picture-Perfect World of Mommy Influencer Culture. This is by Sarah Peterson, and I had to add this here because it's like so weird and strangely fascinating to me. So this is a deep dive into social media's momfluencer culture, which is its hallmark is its unachievable standards and predominantly white creators. And this book really takes a look at how momfluencer social media culture turns motherhood into a public performance. Not that there hasn't always been some level of public performance to motherhood, but I mean, the momfluencer culture really warps that into something new and slightly monstrous. And then I have 2 books to list from Deep Vellum. The first is called Kidnapped, and it's by Ludmila Petrushevskaya, and it's translated by Marion Schwartz. And this is a novel, Petrushevskaya. That's hard. I don't think I'm saying that right. Petrushevskaya is described as Russia's greatest living absurdist and surrealistic writer and a New York Times bestseller. So this novel is set in the 80s and 90s, and it's the story of Alina, who has an unexpected pregnancy and decides that she's going to give her baby up for adoption once she is in the hospital. So she's in the hospital about to give birth, and she meets a woman named Masha, and Masha starts talking about her hopes and dreams for herself and her baby about to be born, and says that they're going to be moving to South Asia. And then Masha dies in childbirth, and Alina, wanting the best for her new baby boy that she had, switches the name bracelets of her baby and Masha's baby, hoping that her baby will have a better life in South Asia with Masha's family than in the Soviet Union. And then apparently there's just a ton of twists and turns from there. And it's described as kind of like a soap opera, and it just like kind of goes crazy from there. Sounds fascinating though. And then also on April 25th from Deep Vellum is Diary of a Malayali Madman. And that is by N. Prabhakaran, and it's translated by Jayasri Kalathil. Prabhakaran is a major postmodern writer who lives in Kerala, and this is the first time his work has been available in English. And these are postmodern stories that are set in northern Kerala, and they weave together the nitty-gritty daily small town life with folklore and nature and politics and relationships. And again, it's from Deep Vellum, and this is the first time his work is available in English. So what have I been reading recently? I just finished a novel by Karente Yamashita, and this is called Brazil Maru, and this is published by Coffee House Press. And this is so good. So this is the story of a group of Japanese immigrants who moved to Brazil in the early 1900s. 1925 is when it starts. And a large number of Japanese immigrants were headed to Brazil at the time, primarily because the United States had stopped allowing Japanese immigrants into the US at that time. And so there was a large number of people from Japan moving to Brazil. And so this follows a group of Christian Japanese immigrants who come to Brazil and move to a remote region of Brazil to start a farming community there. And it follows 4 characters in particular. So it's divided into 4 sections from 4 different characters' perspectives, and tells the story of this community across decades. So you go through 20s, 30s, you go through World War II, and it just tells the stories of these families and their struggles and dreams, and a lot of power dynamics involved here, and it's really phenomenal. I highly recommend this amazing, amazing book. So that is what I have finished most recently. I also want to share a fun little bookish purchase that I got from a shop that is in my neighborhood. It's like it's a really cool store that has like tons of different floors, and it's basically like an arts and crafts fair, but in a permanent store structure. So all these different like local artisans have their shelves or sections where they can sell their things. My kiddo is being... Anyway, so I happened upon one tiny little section of the store where they're selling these amazing journals that were created by a woman who takes, and I've seen these online too, but I'd never seen them in the flesh, takes these vintage books and turns them into journals. So this one is called Bulbs. It's a Time Life books, and anyway, she turns them into journals, but then leaves several of the pages, like the old vintage pages, intact, which is just the coolest thing ever. So I haven't decided what I want to do with this one yet. Just these amazing pages. But I also picked up one that's like a old student like workbook type thing, I think, that's called Word Power Made Easy. Word Power Made Easy. Is that not the coolest title for like a journal or anything? So it's like turned into a journal, but then has these how to check your first week's progress, exercises and stuff in it. So I have a particular plan in mind for this one, but I thought those were so cool. I had to share. If any of those books sounded at all interesting to you, I hope you'll hit the like button and maybe even subscribe. That will hopefully help spread the word about these books, authors, and publishers across the internet a little more widely. My name is Sarah. I think I said that at the beginning again. And thank you so much for joining me and for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.